It's a normal weekday. You check your bank app, maybe it's payday, and nothing looks wrong, but nothing looks better either. Money comes in. Money goes out. You're doing what you're supposed to do, earning more than before, making responsible choices, yet that feeling of being relaxed about money never gets any closer. I'm Ben. I spend way too much time thinking about money, psychology, and the quiet financial patterns that slowly trap people. If you're careful, playing by the rules, and still not getting ahead in a way that actually changes how life feels, this is exactly what I obsess over. Before we go any further, sit with that feeling, because most people here aren't reckless or irresponsible. From the outside, everything looks fine, stable even, but underneath, there's constant low-level tension, like everything only works as long as nothing goes wrong. Here's the thing most people don't realize. There's a specific money trap that doesn't show up as a bad decision. It shows up as a series of reasonable ones. And by the time it becomes visible, the consequences are already baked in. It's not about one purchase or one mistake. It's about how fixed costs quietly expand to absorb every improvement you make. Let's put some simple numbers on this. Say you earn $50,000 a year. And after taxes and basic deductions, you take home around $3,000 a month. At first, your rent is manageable, your car payment feels justified, and your subscriptions barely register. Then a few years later, you earn $60,000, maybe even $70,000, and none of your choices feel irresponsible when you upgrade your apartment a little, trade in the car for something newer, or add conveniences that save time. Each change makes sense on its own, and none of them feel like splurging. What's happening psychologically is that your brain treats increased income as permission to normalize higher commitments, not as an opportunity to increase flexibility. Humans are very good at adapting to comfort and very bad at noticing when adaptability turns into dependence. The math doesn't look scary because each increase is incremental, but emotionally, you're anchoring your lifestyle to a higher baseline that now requires constant income just to maintain. Over 5 years, this plays out quietly. Your fixed monthly obligations creep from maybe 40% of your take-home pay to 60, then 70, and at no point does it feel like a sharp turn. But the real-world consequence is that every dollar you earn has a job before it even arrives, which means raises stop feeling like progress and start feeling like maintenance. This is where it gets interesting, because most people think the trap is overspending, when in reality, the trap is overcommitting. Overspending feels chaotic and obvious, but overcommitting feels responsible, adult, and stable. Yet the outcome is that you've traded optionality for comfort without realizing it. Now, you might be thinking that this is just how adulthood works, that fixed expenses are unavoidable, and that stability requires commitment. And you're not wrong, but what's usually missing from that thought is the cost of losing margin. When the Federal Reserve talks about financial fragility, they're not talking about people who can't pay bills in good months. They're talking about how many people can't absorb even a small disruption without stress. If your monthly expenses are locked in tightly enough, a single unexpected repair or a brief income interruption doesn't just cost money, it costs sleep, focus, and emotional bandwidth. That $500 problem turns into hours of mental energy spent reshuffling payments, delaying plans, and feeling behind. And over time, that constant drain shapes how you make decisions in ways you don't even notice. What most people don't realize is that money stress compounds psychologically before it ever compounds financially. When margin disappears, your brain shifts into a defensive mode where short-term relief feels more valuable than long-term improvement. That's how people end up making choices that look irrational from the outside, but feel necessary in the moment. Over 10 or 15 years, the quiet consequence is that your life becomes less adaptable. Opportunities that require temporary risk, like changing jobs, starting something new, or even taking time off, feel impossible, not because they're bad ideas, but because your fixed costs have removed your ability to breathe. The trap only becomes obvious when you finally want to change something and realize how expensive flexibility has become. Here's the belief flip that usually catches people off guard. The problem was never income level, it was structure. Two people earning the same amount can experience completely different financial lives based solely on how much margin they've preserved. One person feels steady and calm, the other feels like they're always one step from falling behind, even though the math looks similar. The behavioral shift here isn't about cutting everything or living ascetically. It's about treating flexibility as a non-negotiable expense. When you intentionally leave space between what you earn and what you commit to, you're not being overly cautious, you're buying the ability to respond instead of react. Psychologically, that space reduces stress hormones, improves decision-making, and makes patience feel possible again. If you look at long-term data from institutions like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, income volatility is far more common than people expect, and yet most financial advice assumes smooth, predictable earnings. When your structure can't tolerate variability, even normal life events feel like emergencies, which reinforces the cycle of anxiety and short-term thinking. And I know what you're about to say, that not everyone has the luxury of leaving margin, that expenses are already tight, and that advice like this can feel disconnected from reality. That's a fair objection, because margin doesn't appear overnight, and it often requires uncomfortable choices up front. But the key difference is direction. Even small, intentional gaps between income and obligation begin to change how money feels long before they change the balance sheet. Over time, as that gap grows, something subtle but powerful happens. You stop making decisions purely to protect the current setup and start making them to improve the next one. That shift doesn't show up immediately in net worth, but it shows up in confidence, clarity, and the ability to say no without panic. When people talk about financial freedom, they often frame it as a destination, but in practice, it's a gradient. Every dollar of reduced obligation buys back a little mental space, a little time, a little control. The trap is thinking that comfort and stability are the same thing, when stability actually comes from resilience, not rigidity. If you go back to the opening moment, that quiet feeling that nothing is wrong but nothing is better, this is usually what's underneath it. It's not a lack of effort or discipline, it's a structure that quietly optimized for convenience instead of flexibility. Once you see that clearly, the goal stops being more and starts being room. And that's the shift that actually changes things, not chasing higher numbers for their own sake, but designing a financial life that can absorb reality without knocking the wind out of you. When you do that, progress stops feeling fragile, and money stops feeling like something that's always one step ahead of you.